guys got so quiet. Okay. Hello, my name is Kristen Henley, and I'm the managing director here at the Center for Fiction. And it's been a minute since I did an introduction. I'm filling in for our wonderful Melanie McNair, who's a little under the weather tonight. So please bear with me. Um, so, how many of you are here for the first time? Okay, great. Welcome. So, if you don't know about the Center for Fiction, we're the only literary nonprofit in the country that's solely devoted to the art of fiction. So, promoting it, celebrating it, that's what we do here. So, please follow us on social media, sign up for our email list so you don't miss another event. Um, So, we have a few housekeeping rules for tonight. Our cafe and bar will be serving until 8:30. So, you can stay, have a little drink after the event. We will have a audience Q&A once our authors are done speaking. So if you'd like to ask a question, please wait for one of our interns to come around with the mic and excuse me. That's so that everyone in the audience can hear you and also our folks on live streaming it. So hi, live streaming folks. And if you are on the live stream, you can type your question in the chat at any time. Okay. So now for the important part, the reason why we're here. Washu is the author of the Pulitzer Prize winning memoir, Stay True, which won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Autobiography, was longlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Nonfiction, and was a top 10 book of 2022 at the New York Times, Washington Post, The Atlantic, and New York Magazine. He is a staff writer at The New Yorker and a professor of literature at Bard College. Shu serves on the executive board of the wonderful organization, the Asian American Writers Workshop. He was formerly a fellow at the New American Foundation and the Dorothy and Louis B. Coleman Center at the New York Public Library. He lives in Brooklyn with his family. And now for Ed Park. Ed Park is the author of the novel Same Bed, Different Dreams, as well as Personal Days, which was named one of the Times' top 10 books of 2008 and was a finalist for the PEN/Hemingway Award and the Center for Fiction's First Novel Prize. His stories and nonfiction appear in The New Yorker, the New York Review of Books, Harper's, The Atlantic, Book Forum, and many other publications. He is a founding editor of The Believer and the former literary editor of The Village Voice. Born in Buffalo, Ed lives in Manhattan with his family and is currently he currently teaches writing at Princeton University. Please help me welcome our authors.
Amazing. This is incredible. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming out. It's been a long time since 2008 when Personal Days came out, and it's great to have another book out. I'm on the William Gaddis publication schedule, apparently. Before I start, I'm going to read a little bit, and then my buddy Juan and I are going to talk. I just want to say hello to my parents who are watching on a live stream in Buffalo, and also to my wife and one of my kids, Keeler, who they have to live stream as well. I think my other son is here. There, Duncan Park. All right. So I am going to, the book has many different sections and it's done in many different styles. I'm going to read from somewhat later in the book, but no prior knowledge is required. This is from around page 363. There are kind of three main strands in the book. One is a kind of first-person strand following a character named Soon Sheen, who's kind of like an Ed Park stand-in, but different. The other is a more, they're called the Dreams, 5 sections called the Dreams, kind of delving more into history, which Juan and I will discuss. And then there's kind of this third weird thread kind of vibrating between them, and that's where this comes in. So there's a character named Daisy O who we've met earlier in the book, kind of in the present day, and this is actually her as a kind of 20-something in New York. It's set in 2009, and this, I'm just going to read a couple pages. This chapter is called Amsterdam in the 80s. "Lay it on me, Days," says Mel. I'm still formulating my thoughts. Daisy O is at a loss. She has scrupulously read Melinda's screenplay, but would have trouble drumming up a précis. Problems commence with the title, When in Rome, implying the movie will unfold there. But it's just a phrase the characters spout. Most of it is set in the Gowanus neighborhood of Brooklyn. Daisy genuinely likes Mel. They met in freshman bio at Penumbra College when both entertained comical pre-med thoughts. By the third week, they dropped the class, the last science either would take. And by senior year, they were housemates in a leaky Victorian off campus. These days, Daisy doesn't understand her friend's overriding desire to write a screenplay, just as people have stopped going to the movies. Somehow I thought all the characters would end up in Rome, Daisy says. No, it's an expression. It means you follow the custom of wherever you are. I know what it means. When they first met, Melinda confused Daisy with another girl, Nyan, who'd grown up in Seoul. A lot of people mixed them up, and in truth, they did look similar. Even after Nyan shaved her head, though, the confusion remained. Some things weren't worth getting upset about. Part of me thinks there are too many characters, Melinda says. Daisy nods. There are far too many, with names that sound alike. Molly and Sally, Carson and Carter. There's a Rachel and a Rachel, A-E-L. Something Daisy untangled only on a second read. Maybe I should start from scratch. Well, the ending is very strong, Daisy assures her. It's hard to describe exactly. This is true. The end of When in Rome is a speech about artisanal sherry, being present for others, and the charms of Brooklyn. That's why I picked this. The monologue is unleashed by a character named Milton? Who? Daisy suspects he's really Molly or Rachel A-E-L, victim of an abandoned search and replace. It's definitely interesting to hear how sherry making went from a cottage industry to a corporate concern in just 9 months. The time it takes for Rachel without an A to conceive and give birth to her daughter, Hunter. But maybe the sherry stuff would have worked better as a blog post. Since moving to New York, Melinda has become a major foodie, keeping tabs on the best Ecuadorian and getting seltzer delivered by the oldest continually working beverage delivery woman in the city. Their iced coffees look khaki. Seagulls walk the pier on the lookout for fallen fries. It's an arid early summer day. Melinda's in a bone-white blouse with a Peter Pan collar and buttons big as Necco wafers. Daisy would never wear a shirt like that. Melinda is the kind of person who will keep wearing something until it becomes not just acceptable, but inevitable, like a uniform. A new tattoo peeks out from her left sleeve, another Chinese character. Daisy takes When in Rome out of her bag. Melinda opens it like a mom checking a diaper. She faces a sea of carrots and octothorpes, red tails lashing typos away to the margin. Daisy has corrected for grammar and spelling with queries done in her spiky, near cuneiform hand. She's a copy editor at Gazebo, the magazine of high-end lawn furnishings. It was the only job she could find after graduating. Daisy tells friends she's happy to look something over, but she wonders if that's true. The screenplay is full of mistakes, and she thinks less of Melinda for it. The problem with being a good copy editor is that the world will always be in error. Later, alone, Daisy walks the newly opened High Line, a park built on a stretch of old elevated railroad on the west side. Strangely shaped buildings rise around her like alien crystal formations, busted concertinas. What would it be like to live in one? She would stroll the High Line every day, find out the names of the butterflies, the different kinds of plant life, the titles of the weird art that's not exactly her taste, but she would learn to like. To afford a place here, she needs to marry rich or get into a different field. More schooling? No. Maybe she should be writing a screenplay too. It can't be that difficult. You just need a strong point of view. There are stories everywhere you look. The trick is to pay attention. Inspired, Daisy heads east to 6th and decides to follow the first interesting person she sees, study every detail. This person will provide the basis for her main character. It's an exercise she learned from a writing class at Penumbra College called Intro to Wild Word. Each day you tried a new style or technique. The net effect was that it made her not want to be a writer. Waiting to cross 6th Avenue is a Japanese hipster wearing a neck brace. Daisy scribbles down a description on an old Duane Reade receipt. Stringy mustache, tinted glasses, crisp tan blazer over distressed Thin Lizzy t-shirt. Merce made of tarp from a decommissioned military truck. Little does he suspect his future appearance in a critically acclaimed film. Daisy trails him, imagining his life, what he's doing so far from Tokyo, his family, his diet. Maybe he is a video game designer? Too stereotypical. She decides that he came to New York with dreams of becoming a salsa dancer, but then got injured doing a particularly difficult move and needs to stabilize his neck. But it's not a neck brace she sees. Instead, it's one of those inflatable pillows for long flights. Fashion statement or narcolepsy precaution? Perhaps he isn't a hipster, but simply a bum. He walks to 34th and heads into the subway. He gets on a downtown too, and Daisy follows, sitting obliquely across. She idly reads a new scene Melinda gave her at lunch. One of the Rachels is trampling grapes while a baby-faced VC watches, eating Twizzlers, murmuring sleazy encouragement. Daisy peers up from this lurid scenario to spy on her quarry. He leans back, one cheek resting on the neck pillow. His eyes close. Daisy takes more notes. Jet lag? There's a fantastic amount of cat hair on his black skinny jeans. It's hard to penetrate the inner core of this guy. She writes, inner core, question mark, question mark, question mark, on the receipt. In the tiny space left, she sketches his face. When she tries to fix the nose, everything goes downhill. It looks like how a psychic might draw Jack the Ripper. The doors open at 14th and he darts out. Daisy follows. This is a stop closest to her office, and being in the vicinity on a weekend makes her surly. As he vaults up the stairs, something drops out of his Merce. Wait, she calls, but he's already booking down the pavement. By the time she attains the mystery object, the hipster is long gone. It's a thumb drive, 2 inches long, free of markings. She drops it in her tote, then heads back down to catch a train uptown.
Where do you want me to?
I'll go. Yeah, sorry. I don't know what I'm doing.
I thought I was okay.
We're good. Is my mic on? Or
It is. I
We're
can
good?
hear it, yeah.
Okay.
Can everyone hear Ed? Cool.
Thanks.
Um,
Hey. How are you?
I was as you were reading that, I was wondering, have you ever followed anyone
Well,
that you've seen on a subway or just sort of? It was
I think
just
the good answer is
so,
yes, all the time.
So believable. So
I wonder if I did see somebody with a neck bracelet. Like as I was reading that, because that scene, even though I like to say this book took 9 years to write, I think that scene is actually from like around 2009, and I think there might have been like, I don't know, somebody with a neck like a pillow thing on their neck. Now that you mention it, so.
well, it's incredible for me to be here. Ed is someone who I first met, I don't know, like 20 years ago.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
We're
you
only
know,
32, so it's
and I can
middle school years.
and you know, you're sort of one of my earliest mentors. So the idea of being able to be up here with you is incredibly meaningful for me. Ed was a really incredible editor to whom I owe quite a bit. And I feel like there was this period of my life where my sense of taste was just whatever Ed would mention in email. So that's why I have a hardcover of Anatomy of Melancholy under my
Can't go
propping up
wrong
my
with Robert
my
Burton.
monitor. That's why I have all these Charlie Portis books. That's why I was briefly a member of the Harry Stephen Keeler Society, and I still remember when you were talking about how you and some friends were starting a magazine called The Believer.
Yeah.
And you're like, you should check it out when it comes out. And I thought, okay, I'll look this up on Alta Vista or whatever what was available at the time. And the only Believer magazine that existed was like a hardcore, fanatical religious magazine. And such was your influence, I thought, maybe Christianity, maybe. So I'm incredibly happy that this book is out in the world. You read something that also might describe your book. Like there are a lot of characters in your book.
Yeah. A little auto-criticism
Yeah.
going on, yeah.
And so I was wondering if you could sort of situate where that happens in the book. I mean, perhaps some of you did rush out, buy the book this morning, and read the entire thing in preparation for this. But for those who have not, like, what is going on in that scene, and sort of where does it go?
So that comes, the book is 500-ish pages, and that's like about 3/5 of the way in. So that character, Daisy O, when we first meet her, it's like in one of the very early chapters, which is a big dinner scene with a lot of like literary types and Asian American kind of movers and shakers like me and Hua. And it's intended to be this like long comic scene, this dinner that kind of goes downhill. But she's in there, and she's kind of like, she's the translator of this Korean author who's like the enfant terrible of Korean letters, or the former enfant terrible, and he's just being translated into English, and so it's kind of in his honor. And so she kind of has this mysterious power and this kind of relationship with that author, you're trying to parse out. And then as one of the things that happens in the book is like a lot of the characters in that first scene, where I think there are maybe 12, 14 characters, a lot of them drop out for a while and then come back up in different contexts. And in this case, I was talking about the 3 threads. Is everybody writing this down? Like, I was talking about the 3 threads, and this one is kind of like wavering in between. And it's the one where, I mean, this sounds crazy, because what happens what happens in this thread is it goes decade by decade. So each chapter is in a different decade. So I guess this is the late aughts, but it starts in the 60s. So there's chapter in 67 and then 77 or something. And then it kind of goes like that. So they're kind of all related, and you kind of have to like piece it together a bit. But then when you read about Daisy, you should be like, oh, this is Daisy from the beginning. And she's also mentioned a few times in between. And then this is like our kind of, I don't want to, deep dive is not a word that I use, but this is kind of like understanding how
as a policy, you never use the term deep dive.
I try not to,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, I don't know.
It's fine.
Maybe it's the title of my
Well, we
next,
can get
my
into
next
it
book
later.
is called Deep Dive. It's actually about diving.
Yeah.
So I think the idea is like you kind of see her at maybe a more precarious or kind of unknowing stage of her life, and I will also say, like, I said there was a character named Soon Sheen who was like an Ed Park stand-in. I think Daisy kind of is too, because I worked for a long time as a copy editor, and so that whole idea of the whole world being in error, like that, like as a copy editor, I would like look at a misspelling on a sign and be like, that's wrong. So she has sort of a lot of my thoughts and thinking patterns in there. But yeah, I guess to get back to what you're saying, like ideally, like there's this sense of discovery as you're going through the book, and characters who you thought were minor kind of come back and get to be in the spotlight.
So as I was reading it, it also explains the 20th century America. Like, there's a lot of other stuff going on there. Okay.
It's mostly about copy editing, but
I was wondering, like, when you started writing it, because there are parts of this book that are not just 9 years old. They sort of originate with ideas or things you did even earlier than that.
sure.
How were you like collating information, or how were you sort of keeping track of all of this? Because it's one of our favorite authors is Harry Stephen Keeler, who famously
We should
wrote.
just prop that up here.
famously wrote these elaborate novels that would sort of come together, but you did need to actually diagram them. Like, did you have the sort of like Homeland sort of bulletin board on the wall as you listened to jazz and sort of tried to put it all together?
It took so long to write, and there were so many kind of phases of productivity and like, anguish and all that confusion. But I did try to, there are many ways I kind of approached that. One was to periodically like type up a summary of how, what is happening in the story so far, just like something in a couple pages so I could easily read it and be up to speed. But there were also like sometimes like in the dream section, so there's these 5 chapters called Dreams that have a lot of historical fact and fiction based in history. Some of those I just would like write, and it was just kind of like a free association. It was like jazz, and I was kind of like putting these things down and then, printing it out, looking it over, like cutting out the bad stuff, and then, boiling that down to some extent. There are a lot, it's somewhere in my boxes and files, but there are also, I should show you, there are these diagrams that are kind of like what our man Keeler did in terms of web work, just like showing how different characters and objects and concepts like intersect over, like kind of across a timeline. So I basically tried everything because I at certain points there was so much going on that I needed to kind of impose order on it. And I'll just say one other thing, since we're talking about Keeler, I do feel like the end of the book, and actually the end of Personal Days too, like I love Keeler's work, but I don't think I'm a writer like him. But actually the endings of both of my books kind of have that like very rushed sense of connections that he does in a lot of his novels. So maybe that's my debt to our man Harry Stephen Keeler.
So earlier today, we were talking about how when you started writing fiction, like when you're in graduate school, you were sort of drawn to writing these elaborate, dense kind of. It was the '90s. People wrote really long novels at the time.
Jest, yeah.
And you mentioned something called Diet of Worms,
Yes.
which I think is why many people are here to hear about Diet of Worms.
Some people with a Diet of Worms T-shirt back there.
And this was your first attempt to write a novel, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah. So it part of it was my graduate thesis. I didn't finish it in school, but I had started already actually while still at school working at The Voice as a copy editor, and that was my first job. And I kind of picked the job. Well, first I wasn't being offered many jobs, but also you could get most of Tuesday. You usually get Tuesday off, so that they put the paper to sleep on Monday. To bed anyway, and then Tuesday is kind of a lax day, so that was the day I could write, and the weekends as well. I didn't really have any friends, but I finished this book, The Diet of Worms, I think maybe '96, let's say spring of '96. So it was like 2.5, 3 years of really concerted effort, and it was it's a very long book, and it was also done in...
Like, how long are we talking?
It was about 330, 350 pages, but in 10-point type. In a 10-point font. I was looking at it today, I was like, I could barely read it. And I think, I just remember being like 25, 26, thinking like, this font is too big. It looks like it's so comical. And just like, I shrunk it. And so I don't know like what the word count is. And I kind of like, I put it in this kind of cool binder and I was going to bring it. But if I got like mugged, that would be the last copy of The Diet of Worms. So it remains in the vault. Yeah.
What were you into at the time that sort of compelled you? Because you then described other works that were sort of similarly expansive.
Yeah. Well, Infinite Jest was definitely coming to be around, what, like 97-ish? And DeLillo's Underworld, Pynchon's Mason and Dixon. I think those are the three I remember best. And I was a big DeLillo head going into it. So I had, there was that long gap between Mao 2 and Underworld. And I had read, like, not just everything DeLillo wrote, but like his like his interview, like any little scrap, interviews, reviews, his pseudonymous book, Amazons.
Cleo Birdwell.
Cleo Birdwell, which is one of the great hockey novels. And anyways, those all were kind of in the air. And I guess I would say, like, I actually didn't like really study Underworld again for this, but there are certain things as it was taking shape, like I thought the way he kind of threaded certain objects, especially through Underworld, there was some similar things going on here. But to think back to the 90s and when I was working on The Diet of Worms, and then, I mean, I think I told this to you on the phone, like, I had an agent, but no editor would take it. And then when that happened, I wrote another book that was like even longer, and no agent would look at it. So, but that was kind of like, I just felt like those were the books I enjoyed, and that was sort of like, it was good to be expansive, and it was good to like bring in everything you knew. I guess the one thing I will say, there were some Korean themes in The Diet of Worms that are, some of them leak out a bit into this new one, but there were other things that just, I was looking at it today and I was like, there was a Dutch sailor who got shipwrecked in the 1620s. And I think in The Diet of Worms, like he like starts a cult in Korea. There's all this stuff about the martyred Korean Catholic saints. There was a secret organization called FINK, which was Facts and Information About North Korea.
Wait, this is Diet of Worms.
This is in Diet of Worms, yeah. I guess we should talk about the new book.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've already read it, so
yeah.
I'm more curious about this secret work. You then, it was your destiny as someone named Ed to become an editor. So you started working at the Village Voice, and you told me earlier that sort of beginning to work as a critic, working at the Village Voice, sort of changed your approach to maybe not literary form, but just sort of how to deliver ideas or how to write at length or not at length?
I think that's true. Yeah, I think there was a point kind of after the demise or the unwelcoming reception that second unpublished novel got, where I really, I took on more responsibilities editing at The Voice and started writing a lot more. Actually, first writing film reviews for my friend Dennis Lim. And then, I got to become the literary editor. So I was editing a lot of stuff, but also writing and kind of like writing to length, and just I don't know how I did. I guess when you're younger, you have more energy, but like reading books and then like writing up this kind of stuff that even like all these years later, if I have occasion to be like, oh, what did I write about like B.S. Johnson, and I read the article, I was like, it's pretty good. Like I might, and I did, but I remember just doing it, like reading like 3 or 4 books for a single piece, and then like, making it fit in 1,000, 1,200 words. Like it was really. But I think the thing is, you kind of learn how to do it because it's a lot of fun, and it's fun to, it's fun to publish. It was fun to have people read things that I wrote after nobody reading the 2 novels. Yeah.
So do you think? Obviously, your first novel, Personal Days, it draws on your experiences at the Village Voice, right? But was its form, because it's a very slim novel, also a product of you kind of reorienting yourself as a writer around then?
I think so, because I think it was like, well, those 2 books didn't work. Maybe something short, funny, and readable will work. But it was also the case that I didn't quite know what I was writing, because I was just quickly, like, toward the end of my time at The Voice, like it had been sold and a lot of people were getting laid off, and I kind of thought my time was coming, and I could see like people I had worked with for years sort of vanish, and it's more like taking notes about that. And like, but as a fiction writer, as I'm writing, I'm also like fictionalizing it and like making up names. And then when I had, a couple dozen pages, I was like, this should be a novel. And so then, I kind of permitted myself to imagine that. And then I was kind of almost done with it, and then I did get laid off. And I got laid off on Labor Day 2006, I think. And in my mind, I was like, okay, I'll finish this novel by Thanksgiving. And I did. Like, it was just, but I think kind of what you're saying, like at a newspaper, you're like, you gotta write fast. And I was like, all right, I'm just gonna keep going. And so I did not do that with Same Bed, Different Dreams.
So I feel like over the years, I've asked you like, what are you working on?
Yeah.
And a lot of things that you mentioned are somewhere in this book. A lot of things aren't in this book at all, which I find kind of amazing as well. How did this project come together? You said that you've been writing it for 9 years, but
Yeah.
clearly some of the stuff about North Korea, cults, belief systems, like alternate histories, that runs through all of your work, and it even stretches back to Diet of Worms,
Yeah.
right? One of your a work that I hope we all have the pleasure of reading someday. But yeah, I guess like how did this begin? Because it feels like it does encompass everything. Like it is a history of everything almost. So how did you start it, but also keep it organized as a single project?
Well, at the very beginning, I had been working on short stories while I was a book editor for several years, and kind of all I could do was like short stories, and people would invite me to read, and I would write something, and so I kind of had a bunch of stories, and then I thought, well, maybe I'll try something new, and just this scene came. So this first big scene where there's this Soon Sheen, the Ed Park stand-in, goes to this. He's been living upstate. He comes into Manhattan. They're in Koreatown, and it was almost like just imagining versions of either people I knew or just fun things I could do with like the literary world or with Asian American stuff or like both, and it was like a party in my mind. Like it was just sort of like it just kept. I mean, not writing itself, but every character there was something to say, and I know it'll seem like a lot of characters, but I hadn't experienced anything like that, and so that was sort of what pulled me forward. I was like, this should be a novel. And
Wait, what hadn't you experienced?
like that idea of like
Hanging
I'm
out
writing
inside
well, first, yeah, I wasn't hanging out with anyone, but but I guess the feeling that here's a novel, here is the beginning of a novel. Yeah, there were some kind of earlier attempts, which we don't have to get into, but this felt like I wanted to stay with these characters and see what came up. And what I didn't realize, so the first draft kind of just went linearly, and it was first person. It was this guy Soon Sheen, and it was kind of just this voyage forward. And there was like some interesting things, but at page 700, it was like, I'm not sure people are gonna be with me here. And one thing that happened, this was probably, I think it was 2019, I read a novel called Big Bang by a writer named David Bowman. It was a posthumously published novel that kind of reshaping, recontextualizing of American popular culture and cultural history, from mid-century through the 60s. And it kind of wouldn't necessarily be my kind of book, but it was like no other historical novel I'd read. And just every single page was interesting. Every episode was gossipy and fun. And I think in my mind, I was like, what if I did that with Korean history? Mm-hmm. Like all the things that I've read over the many years, what has stayed in my mind? And maybe I was thinking like Bowman made me care about stuff that I, maybe could take or leave, like just the voice married to the subject, brought me forward. So I kind of did that with Korean stuff, and I didn't know that it would be part of the book, the novel. I was almost like, maybe this is better than what I was writing. And what I realized was that there's that Korean author in the novel whose name is Echo. His pen name is Echo. The problem with writing a character who's like a genius novelist is then you have to like prove that he's a genius.
Right, yeah.
And like, so in my original draft, it was like reviews of his books. It's not very convincing. But then it's like, well, if I'm not a genius, how do I like make him a genius? But then something about the way these historical things, just the voice was like so different from the original first person voice. And it took a while, but I was like, no, this is not a different project, and I should not abandon this. This belongs in the main work.
Wait, so just so I understand,
Yeah.
so you had this, you actually started the book, you started writing the book, how the book actually starts with
Yes.
this like hangout of these
Yeah,
people at
hanging out,
Koreatown
chilling out.
who were all there on the occasion of this person Echo.
Right.
But you were also working on sort of a narrative, like a historical novel, basically, about Korea.
Well, that was 5-ish years in.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you thought you were doing something different, and then you thought, I could just put this inside.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It seems... and it works. It just seems really, really scary to do something like that.
I couldn't have predicted it. Like, I
Yeah.
literally, like, if I hadn't read Big Bang,
Yeah.
like, Bowman, I had been a huge fan of this book he wrote called Let the Dog Drive in the 90s, but then I, like, never read
Is
it.
it about a driving dog?
It's about there is a dog. The funny thing about that book is there's a blurb from Joan Didion on the back, but it's actually like her response to a letter that he wrote her. So you read it, it's like what? But he name checks her in the book. Anyway,
That's
it's a really fun book, but Big Bang was nothing like that. So. I mean, almost like with Personal Days, where I'm writing notes, and oh, maybe this is a book. It was sort of with Dream 1, Dream 2 in this book. I'm writing this thing about Korean history that I think is really interesting. Oh wait, maybe it's fiction and it should be in the novel. Yeah.
Wow.
You're like,
It's fascinating to know that, because it feels so seamless, the way everything sort of nests inside, like all the different dreams and chapters.
Thank you.
And so,
Yeah.
no, it's really remarkable. So you talked about this being kind of 5 years into the process.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess at what point, I mean, you earlier you mentioned that year 6 was very difficult.
Yeah.
I'm just curious sort of
They're all kind of difficult.
I just have year 6.
Like month
written
1
down.
was really good, and then
But what were those challenges as you continue to build this world,
I think
or
that-
these multiple worlds?
I think the challenge, up to a certain point, it was like, it's fun to do sort of literary satire, and like, there's a bit of a publishing satire involved, and it's fun. And in a lot of ways, I'm happiest as a comic novelist. But I think this is a good question, because I think at a certain point you realize, well, the character's Korean, and Personal Days was not like, there were no one was kind of defined as Asian as such at all, right? They were kind of raceless. And
Can we pause really quick?
yeah.
Did you think of them as raceless as you were writing this novel?
Yes, of Personal Days.
yeah.
I think yes and no. I think at first I did, and then as raceless. Like, I mean, they're just names, and these are just funny incidents.
Yeah.
And then I think they sort of like, I kind of was like, oh, this is kind of like me, or
Right,
you
yeah.
know, or Dennis.
Yeah.
And there was one incident where HR gave me Dennis's paycheck, and I was like, oh. And I put that in the book. But whereas this was like from the
yeah.
get-go, I was like, wow, like I can write about Korean, Asian American stuff, and have fun with it, right? But I think that was also like maybe in the initial run, as I was the initial draft, I kind of went with it, but I didn't go deep enough. And it's like, I think part of the issue was, what does it mean for this guy to be Korean American? And what are the deeper issues? And the question that opens the book is, what is history? And I think that there was a realization that the Korean history that I knew and that I was interested in, and like the Korean American history, and like kind of the American history and pop culture history, like there was a way it all kind of meshed together that seemed, at the very least, to me at least, fascinating. And then maybe there was something deeper. And so I think once I kind of had that and was able to like merge it with the initial voice, the initial narrative voice, then I was like, oh, I get it now. And then, not to complicate things, and then I was like, oh, and then I'll put a third thing in there to kind of glue it together. But yeah.
Earlier you mentioned how the Big Bang, this novel,
Yeah.
made you care about things that you may not have dispositionally cared about,
Yeah.
and that you wanted to do something similar with, say, Korean history or
Yeah.
Korean Americans. Did you have any kind of hesitancy to write from that perspective or about those histories or experiences?
I don't know that I hesitated here. I think I found it so interesting. Well, I found it interesting to what I remembered seemed interesting. Like, why did I remember these things? So there are. I mean, not every interesting thing I learned about Korea is in the book, but a lot of it is in there. And so whether it's like this poet Yi Song, who this kind of wild modernist poet who I've been reading, I guess I started like in the early 2000s, so it's been like 20 years, and just like I still don't quite understand but like what if he were an agent for this group, the Korean Provisional Government? Like what if his strange like numerical poems are actually like a code? And that was like just very invigorating for me to kind of address that stuff.
So there is this body, the Korean Provisional
Yes.
Government. Can you explain what that is, first of all?
Yeah, very quickly. In 1919, there are these mass demonstrations all across Korea, which is still like one country, but it's a colony of Japan. It's this peaceful protest everywhere, you know, done in secret, and to protest and kind of try to claim independence. And then a couple months later, they start something called the Korean Provisional Government, which is like a government in exile based in Shanghai, and doesn't really have any power, but it's like a way to, you know, publicize what's going on. They name as their first president a man named Syngman Rhee, who will later be the first president of South Korea. He's already living in Hawaii. He's in exile. He was already quite old at this time, and but he was, you know, hardcore Christian, very pro America. But he's trying to get anybody to listen, like Teddy Roosevelt. He's like going around. Woodrow Wilson was his professor at Princeton. He gets a letter of recommendation from Woodrow Wilson, which I put in the book. And anyway, so that's kind of the reality. And then the fictional part is when I start enlisting all sorts of other people like Yi Song, Korean figures, but also like non-Korean figures like Marilyn Monroe, and just it became sort of.
We are all part of it.
Yeah, and actually all of you.
If you bought a book, you're
you
part
bought
of the
a book.
Christian.
Just wait, yeah. So anyway, but that idea was like, that becomes a kind of running line, like so-and-so is a member of the Korean Provisional Government. And that kind of helped give a voice to those sections that was strong, I felt.
So the book begins with this question, what is history?
Yeah.
And the way you use history is so fascinating because, you know, when you have a chance to read the book, it is a story. There is a central story of these characters that are hanging out at the beginning. But, you know, there are all of these episodes and vignettes and conspiracies and dreams. And it can be very kind of whimsical at one moment and surreal the next. But there is this kind of rooted interest in the historical. Because even that story of Syngman Rhee, the parts that were true are even weirder than the parts you fabricated. You know what I mean? And so throughout the book, there's all sorts of great Buffalo history that I did not know as someone who's never been to Buffalo. That it sort of compelled me to put the book down and be like, did this actually happen? Were the Sabres really this good at one time? But I was wondering, like, you know, there are all of these parts that are sort of buried in the fantasy. So I guess, like, if you go back to that question of what is history, what is the book's relationship to history? Because it is about a lot of things that many people picking up the book will not innately know that much about.
Yeah. I think that, you know, that phrase secret history is just always a favorite phrase of mine. I think it's overused. Like there's a newspaper article about, you know, the secret history of avocados or something. But, you know, it is so, I mean, obviously there's the Donna Tartt novel, right? It's just such a great combination of words. And I think what I was trying to do partly is tell you about these things that a lot of the stuff is real. And then at what point, since this is a novel, can I invent scenes and make up stuff? Like Marilyn Monroe was not, as far as I know, part of the Korean Provisional Government. The KPG really ended in the 40s. It is not still around today, I don't think. So it's like, how do I use what I find fascinating about history, these episodes and these groups and these entities, and make them work in a novel? Like, I don't know how much like Bowman invented, like David Bowman in this book Big Bang. Like, there's this great scene where I think it's like Norman Mailer and Saul Bellow are driving around Utah. They're both about to get divorced or something, and I'm like, did that really happen? But it's like a great scene. So, kind of thinking like, I mean, I should stress, like, I hope the book is entertaining, like, 'cause I think that's what there are a lot of jokes, and I'm trying to make it not just like a data dump, an info dump. It's anything that's in there has at its core like some kind of compelling story, compelling reason to be there.
So would you say your book is sort of the answer to the question of?
I was thinking that, yeah. So it starts with what is history, and I think, I mean, not to give anything away, but it is the book itself is the answer to that, and through my lens, as the writer, but also of some of the characters, they kind of grapple with it, and I think answer the question. Yeah.
So I'm fascinated with the process of the book. Like how you're able to keep it straight in your head, but also how long was it at one point?
So there was a first draft where I got to the end, and my agent PJ might be the only one who read it, and he was very gentle, but it was clearly like crazy. It was just, I don't know what happened. Like it was that first person voice, and then I'll tell you what happens at page 600 something. There's like an underground tunnel that he's driving to Korea in this car, and it's very weird. And then it's like, then the idea was like, oh, then it's like the second part of the book will have nothing to do with the first. And so it was kind of like, I feel like it's like at the end of that Wong Kar-wai movie where it's suddenly like, Tony Leung's.
Yeah. He's just,
did we see this guy before? Is he the
but it's
father?
really just the next film.
Yeah. It's really, so we don't know that. But it was kind of like inspired by like wouldn't it be cool? Like It says it's same bed but different dreams, and like this will be so different. Like nobody will know it's bad. And so it was like this whole other thing, but it was kind of done in the style of like Maggie Nelson and Sarah Manguso, like these kind of short poetic things. But I don't know. It didn't work, and I think I was able to like step away, and other things happened. I read Big Bang. I was like eventually had this vision of how the book could actually work. So I jettisoned that whole second dream is like gone. I took the original Soon Sheen narrative, which was stretching into hundreds and hundreds of pages, and I said, I'm just going to take the 6 chapters I like the best, and I'm just going to forget I wrote the rest. And so they like came up, and I'm going to build the dreams around that. And I mean, it wasn't like logical. It was just sort of like I saw the problems I had created for myself. I was like, I gotta fix them. And I guess that's how, like, having been a book editor too, like, I've had some books where it's like you press print, and then I've had some books where it's like, let's like whiteboard this, and and so I kind of had to do that to myself a bit. Yeah.
I just love hearing what things could have been. I mean, it's perfect as is. So thanks for humoring me. We have time for some questions. Someone will, I guess, as people work up the nerve. I did have one question, which is, you're really good at rendering workplace, obviously in Personal Days, but also in that vignette or the reading. Do you miss being in an office? Because you no longer work in an office.
I no longer work in an office. I do something, I've been teaching again, so I sometimes, like, once a week I'll go into an office, and it's like kind of fun. You can get like coffee and have a little chat, Xerox stuff, like all that stuff. There's like paper clips. It's like great, and I enjoy talking to. But maybe it's like since I'm just there one day,
it's novel
it's like,
to you.
This is great.
Yeah.
I have Yeah, I don't know. I'm not saying I would never go back, but it's certainly like an interesting place to be a writer. Yeah.
If you have a question, you can raise your hand and we'll come over to you with the microphone.
Thanks so much, by the way. That was like very funny and engaging. I'm curious, like I discovered you through Instagram, and I don't know if anyone follows you. Like you're a very prolific poster.
Me?
Yes, yeah, you went. Sorry. So I'm genuinely like curious. Like you do all these different things. Like,
An intern does that for me.
but like, how do you view that sort of like part of your life where you're sort of like sharing these like little tidbits from things you're editing or writing and like
It's
sharing
deeply
that?
embarrassing, and I'm embarrassed that you brought it up. But I do. I mean, kind of Instagram is the only social media thing I do, but I think it just must be ingrained in me because I used to blog a lot, and then I did like this weekly zine called the New York Ghost. Like nobody was paying me, but there is a sort of I don't know. It's just like, it sounds cliche, but I like making stuff. Like I like, doing that kind of stuff. I mean, like Instagram is definitely low, the threshold is pretty low, but I try not to fill it with too much junk. Hopefully, like if a funny, like I see a funny sign, I can make a little joke. But I'm deeply embarrassed, but thank you. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Hi,
Hey,
Ed.
Janice, what's up?
That was amazing. In the past 20 years,
Yeah.
when you've been writing this book, but just in the past 5, there's been this explosion of Korean and Korean American culture brought to the forefront.
Yeah.
When you were watching that happen as you were writing this book, how did that affect or not affect your writing?
I mean, I was like, wait a sec, because one of the conceits originally was like, no Korean author's ever gonna like make it in the U.S. And then like the vegetarian comes out like, I mean, there was definitely like a version of K-pop when I started, but nobody could have foreseen like BTS, right? And so there is still some residual K-pop in the book, but there used to be like the main character soon like takes in the old version takes a teaching job, and his students are all like, it's basically this 12-member K-pop band. But
You should have kept that.
It's like when I say it, it sounds better
Yeah,
than
it's
it
good.
actually was. But I mean, I can't help like. Well, I guess what's interesting is like, it's not just Koreans and Korean Americans or the diaspora listening to K-pop. It's like, I have like non-Korean students who are like huge K-pop fans, and they've been to Korea and they learn Korean, and it's just kind of as a kid of the 70s, growing up in Buffalo, where there weren't so many Koreans. Like it's kind of hard to imagine like that the Korean culture, that those kind of cultural exports would even have such an audience. I mean, I don't know where it's all going to lead, but I definitely. I grumbled a bit and then just kind of like accepted it, and it's like maybe it'll be good for the book. Thanks.
Hey, I'm really looking forward to reading the book. I've yet to read it, but my question was, do you have hopes to translate this in Korean for Korean audiences? And, when you were picking the sort of histories to write around,
Yeah.
were you sort of conscious about how Koreans can be sensitive about fictionalizing or fabricating certain parts of their history?
They are. I didn't. Now you're making me worry. The second part was not on my mind. I mean, obviously, I'd be thrilled if it did get translated. I mean, it's such a big book, and it's really like, it's complicated. I can, crossing my fingers. Hopefully, a Korean publisher will take it on. As to what the response there will be, maybe it'll be very, very harsh. But I don't know. I would like to think that one of the reasons I'm a writer and one of the reasons I wrote this book is, just some some kind of, you want to write the best book you can in English, and it's going to deal with these Korean things, and it's also American things, and just, I don't know what I'm saying, like, it's not like I want the president of Korea to give me a medal or something, but, you know, it's I do feel, you know, I was born in America, I don't really speak Korean or even understand it that well anymore, but, you know, I do feel connected to it, and it would be nice to see it appear in, you know, my ancestral land. So, thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
And we have time for one more question.
Oh, here's one up here. Or
There's one there.
Sue
too.
can-
Hi, Ed. Thank you. I was fascinated to hear, and it was a wonderful interview, the evolution of kind of just the writing and how from expansive to more, and it just seems that you integrate with everything that you read and learn,
Yeah.
kind of and grow. And so, you know, I know that was 9 years, but as you look at that past, what do you see for yourself in the future? Is this just going to be the next book is going to be, you know, a total other evolution?
I think I've actually started something because I was like, I cannot take another 9 years. Like, so I've been, as I've been waiting for publication, I've been like, every morning I'm like writing. This, by the way, is how I write. So I've been writing. And I think there'll be some, I don't, you know, who knows what'll happen, because I feel like I didn't mean for the book to kind of evolve into this, and you never know. But right now, you know, at least the concept is something I can kind of get my head around. There are some historical elements, but it's kind of like a horror novel. Maybe I shouldn't say that. But it will also have kind of a lot of Korean elements as well, I think. And Buffalo elements too, actually. I won't say anymore, but there was a moment, this is kind of when you're talking about like, how do you like organize stuff? You know, some of the dreams, they're all numbered, right? And so it's like, you know, kind of 20 different items. And at one point I was going to include something, and then I stopped because I realized that would be like, if I went down that rabbit hole, it would be like another 3 or 4 months before I emerged. I was like, just got to keep going, save it for another book. So that's kind of like the kernel, I think, hopefully for the next one.
Thank you all so much. Please help me thank our audience.
Thank you all. Oh my God. Thank you.
So Ed was kind enough to pre-sign books, so they're for sale out in our bookstore, and if you all would exit through the back door, and then if you do want them personalized, though, Ed will be signing out here, but we'll have you line up in the auditorium, and our cafe is still serving, so if you'd like to have a drink and mingle. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. Yeah.